Hi everybody, welcome back to part 8 of the Trumpeter 200 scale Bismarck build with the Pontos set. This time I'm going to finish off the aft superstructure, or the bottom part of it, that I started a couple of weeks ago now. And this time I want to get all the painting done and the deck fitted. I've got some extra details to build in this video, and I'm going to start with the paravanes that are completely from the Pontos set. They replace the Trumpeter parts altogether. So 4 of those to build and 1 or 2 other things. So we'll get straight over to the bench. Let's get the parts for the paravanes out and get them built up. I'm going to start this week building the paravanes. Now these are the items that are supplied in the Trumpeter kit. They're just one-piece plastic items. So you'd simply glue these onto the bulkhead. But I'm going to be replacing them with the Pontos items, which includes a turned brass paravane body and 11 or 12 photo etch parts as well. So that's what we're doing first. The first job is to find the paravane body, which is this part here. And then there are quite a few pieces of photo etch. This is in the advanced set that you get this multiple photo etch. If you just had the basic set, I think you get 1 or 2 parts to add to the Trumpeter plastic rather than rebuilding the whole paravane. So we'll cut the parts off that we need. You can see from these that I've already done 2 or 3 of them. But I wanted to do one on camera as well. So those are the parts for one paravane. So there are basically 3 sections to it, apart from the body. The first one is the fin assembly, which goes at the back, and some stays. Then we've got the mounting brackets, which fit to the bulkhead. And finally, and probably the most complicated part, is these 3 here, which form the sled which goes at the front. So I'm going to start with the fins, and here we have some slots in the back of the turned brass part. It's tempting to put some glue on there to hold that together, but I'd advise not to, because it'll just block the slot up. They're so fine that the slightest obstruction will stop the parts going together. So when the 2 fins are in like that, it's only then that I put some thin super glue in just to lock it in place. The braces here have to be folded up into a kind of box, which then goes around those fins, but it's very fragile. And we've got quite a bit of handling to do on this before we've finished it, so I'm going to leave those until the end. The next thing to do is to make up the brackets which fit the paravane onto the bulkhead. So these are folded in half. Now I don't glue these because we have a cross brace to fit at the bottom, which are these very small pieces. So even though these cross braces are so small, they do actually hold the bracket together. Just secure that with a tiny spot of glue. So you should end up with a crucifix effect like that on the underside. And because of the cross brace, that should stand up on its edge like that. So that's the front one. Got the rear one, which is slightly smaller. Moving on to the sled now, and I just want to bend these tabs over. This is quite a complex part. We have to bend this a few times. So the first bend is just some little tabs at the bottom. And then the legs splay out, and the top bracket fits as a double piece of brass. So just squeeze that together, but don't glue it at this stage. So you end up with a sort of V shape, and that eventually will join up onto the plate that we've just built. But before we do that, we have to insert this piece, which wraps around the nose of the paravane. We have to insert this first into the top part of the legs that we've just bent up. So it ends up being sandwiched here at the top, and it's only at that stage that we can glue it together. Before we do, it has to be aligned really carefully, otherwise the whole sort of geometry really of this piece goes out of sync. It's the same shape, so it's not too difficult to line up, but it is important to get it right, otherwise you'll struggle to fit this. The trick now is to attach that to this plate at the bottom. So there's a slot in the plate into which this piece of brass here at the bottom fits. So it goes in something like that, and the legs come down at that angle and onto the ends of the bottom plate. And just secure the underside as well. So that's what the part should look like eventually. We've got the bottom plate connected to the two angled wings, or stays if you like, coming down at the side, and the brace for the front of the paravane, or the paravane's nose, here trapped in between and connected into the centre of the bottom plate. So there's quite a bit to align and get right. The important thing is to get the legs at the side splayed backwards at a slight angle, you can see there. And that's why it's so important to get the alignment up at the top correct when you join the legs with the paravane nose bracket. I think once you've done that, you're on the home straight. That's the toughest part. Now, in terms of getting all this together, the first thing I want to do is to fit the aft mounting bracket, so the smaller of the two. So I just want to open up the part that wraps around the paravane body. And drop it in at the back just ahead of the fins, and then bring it forward slightly. Once you've got it in the right position, you can close that ring up again a little bit, squeeze it tight, and just secure it with a drop of glue. Now, getting the front bracket on is a little bit more complicated because we have to put the paravane into the sled. But before we join it all up and glue the sled in position, we have to just put the front mounting bracket onto the nose of the paravane. And once we've done that, the sled can come forward again over the bracket and into position. You can see it's a bit of a tangle of parts, but it's the only way really of doing it. So now I'll glue the front bracket into position to secure it. And when we're doing that, you just got to make sure that it's aligned with the bracket at the back. Obviously they've both got to seat up onto the bulkhead. I've got the two brackets secured there, and at that point you can then pull the sled forward over the nose and just tack it in position on the nose. There's a little notch in the ring at the front that goes onto a pin at the front of the paravane. But it's not a massive contact area, so it's difficult to keep it in. So you just want to align the sled so that the plate at the bottom will eventually sit up on the bulkhead. So something like that. Now at this point, with all the fiddling around, you saw how much handling there was of the paravane to get all that to fit together. It would have been dangerous to fit this fragile frame that fits around the fins at the back. So I'm going to do that now. So this has to be formed into kind of a box, really. So there are a few folds to make on it. I'm not going to glue that together at the moment. What I'll do is thread it over the fins of the paravane. So not closing it up completely, just gives enough space to drop that over the fins. And once it's in position, then you can add some glue. Okay, the frame at the back there, it actually provides some connecting braces between the different fins. The last part that we're going to be fitting is this tiny part. It's about 1 millimetre across, and it really needs to have a fold in it. It's the lifting lug for the paravane. It just needs a slight bend in it so that it stands up on the top of the paravane body. But bending a part like this is very tricky. It's hard to get it into the pliers to get a good bend. But it just slots on the top. There's a little band that goes around the paravane body, and the lifting lug just goes onto the top of that. So that's one of the paravanes finished. As I said, there are 4 to build for this aft superstructure part that we're on with at the moment. And obviously they need priming, painting, and then fitting to the bulkhead. Here are the 4 paravanes that we need for this aft superstructure. And just one thing to note about them is that you've got to remember to build 2 facing aft and 2 facing forward. So you've got to get the brackets on the right way. But those are ready to paint up, and we'll fit them to the bulkheads a bit later on. The next thing I want to do is to build these 4 hatches that run adjacent to the aft superstructure. So these are the 4 trumpeter parts for one side, and Trumpeter actually provide a grill that goes over the top in etched brass, but I'm going to be using the Pontos replacement parts, which provides a grill. These are actually skylights, and a lid with some stays on as well, so a little bit more detailed than what Trumpeter offer. So here we've got from the Pontos set the grills, which incorporate the stay, and some lids as well to go over the top. So I'm going to be building these in the open position, which probably isn't strictly accurate, but it just adds that little bit of detail, being able to see down onto the grills. So with these we want to bend the stay up at the front just beyond 90 degrees so it angles back slightly. The hinges on the lids will have to be bent back slightly as well, just at a similar sort of angle. I'll just do another one. Pontos have put some tiny handles on the side of these hatch lids or skylight lids. Just bend those up through 90 degrees. Okay, so they're the skylights that go alongside the aft superstructure. Put those to one side. These are life rings which are provided in the Pontos set. These are basically rubber grommets, I think they are. Certainly rubber anyway. And we've got some photo etch for straps at the back, and they wrap around the sides. Now, however Pontos meant us to build these, I've deviated because there was all sorts of folds and bends on them that I just think is pretty impossible really on a part as small as this. So all I did is just apply glue to the life ring, center it on the strap, like that, let it dry, give it a while to dry up, and I'll just cut the photo etch here. You can see that there's all this extra brass at the top which is meant to fold around and down and goodness knows where. It's far too complicated, so I'll just cut that off and then just gently ease the pieces of brass around the tube. You don't want to squeeze these too tight because being rubber, these will distort. They're the 3 life belts that we need for this part of the assembly. And I don't know what Pontos were doing really with all those folds that they required or suggested you did with these. I was about to say that they'd gone completely overboard, but that would be a terrible joke. These are some bulkhead mounted hose reels. So we need 3 of these at this point. Now I've tried to bend these little strips around, but they just all break off, so I'm just going to take those off anyway. They don't add an awful lot to the detail. There are no fold marks in those, so I don't quite know how we were supposed to get them round. Anyway, we've not lost anything with that. I just realised actually when I was test fitting this deck onto this superstructure that there's a gap all the way around the edge, and that's for these photo etch waterways, and I think it'd be the best idea to fit these at this stage, then I can just paint them in the same grey as the bulkheads rather than trying to fit these individual parts later on after I've painted everything. These parts add a lot of detail because the Trumpeter deck, if you can see underneath, is just wood all the way to the edge, whereas these had what I presume was non-slip or mesh material here on these outside panels just around these anti-aircraft mountings. So again, adding a lot more detail than is in the basic Trumpeter kit. But I will fit these now because it'll be much easier to get everything painted rather than run the risk of damaging paintwork later on. So with these, I'm only going to apply cement or some CA all the way around the waterway, not on the mesh itself. Otherwise there's a danger of blocking that up. Okay, so that's one side, the port side, finished. I'll repeat that on the other side, then I'll have to prime this again. So those waterways and these meshes here really add quite a lot of detail. I'm glad I noticed those before I went any further. But I will have to go back and prime them. Then we can eventually get round to putting some of the XF19 on the upper superstructure colour. Okay, so let's get this painted. So the first thing I want to do with the painting stage is to paint a very fine black band along the bottom edge of the bulkhead. I don't know what the purpose of that was, but it appears in the photograph, you can see it fairly clearly. So to do that, I'm first of all just going to put a touch of rubber black along the bottom, and then I'll mask that off before I paint the grey. So that's job number one. Now I've got some 1mm masking tape here, which is about right for the line around the bottom of this bulkhead. Okay, so I've worked all the way around the bottom of the bulkhead with the 1mm tape. Hopefully that'll give us a nice black line around the bottom now when we paint the grey on. So for the grey I'm going to be using Tamier's XF19, which is sky grey, and it's lighter than the XF66 that I used on the hull. You can clearly see the distinction between the superstructure and hull colours on photographs of the ship. So I'll load the XF19 up and then we can get this painted. Okay, so let's see how we've done with this black masking at the bottom of the bulkheads. Okay, that's nice, I'm happy with that. I'll just do one or two little touch-ups where I couldn't get the masking tape. Worth doing, I think. It's taken about half an hour to mask that off and paint it, but just adds that little bit of extra detail as well. So I've also painted the sky grey on the bases for the secondary guns and the anti-aircraft guns as well, and a couple of hatches that are going to be exposed through the deck. So I can now fit the deck. So I'm going to do this in two parts again, as usual. It's my usual method. So I'm basically only exposing half of the adhesive on the deck. Yeah, that's gone down okay. It's a nice fit. It's a little bit tight around these hatches and the bottom of this gun here, but it's gone down all right. So the deck has conformed nicely to this section here, which is raised. You can see the shape of it going up and sloping down at the sides. And this is where the catapult was located, along this line here. And this slope was presumably to assist pulling the aircraft up from the hangar, which was located here, and up some rails and onto the catapult. So I was a bit concerned that the deck wouldn't stick down on that slope, but it has done, so I'm happy with that. And that whole assembly's gone together pretty well. So I just want to add the paravanes now and the life rings, and then I think we can call this section done. Okay, so that's the aft part of the lower superstructure done. And it's turned out nice. I'm pretty happy with that. I've now got the same sort of process to do on this part, which is Z1, and it's quite a similar sort of process to the one that I've just been doing over the last couple of weeks. So stripping off the trumpeter detail, replacing it with the photo etch painting and so on, and we've got some deck to fit on the top as well. So because it's so similar, I'm not going to cover all of that on camera. I'm going to do it off camera and just come back to it a bit later on when I've brought it to a similar stage as this one. If there's anything different, any new techniques or anything that I come across building this section, I will cover it, but I think it's going to be much the same as we've been doing over the last couple of weeks, so I don't want to repeat myself with that. Okay, so that's it for this week. I'm going to carry on with this forward element of the superstructure over the next couple of weeks, as I said, off camera, and because I'm not going to be doing that for next week's video, I'm going to have to think of some other thing that I can usefully be doing for part 9. I don't know what that's going to be yet, but I'll have a hunt through the box, and whatever I come up with, it'll stand me in good stead, because it'll be getting us ahead a little bit for later on in the build. And we'll get a short video out next Friday, as usual, as a premiere at 8 o'clock. So I hope to see you for that, everybody. In the meantime, look after yourselves, stay safe, and I'll see you in another week. Bye for now.